Hello students, Mr. John here. Today we're getting into ancient Greece. This is chapter 7, lesson 1. So there's 4 lessons in chapter 7. They're each jam-packed with information, so I highly recommend that while you're going through the lessons that I create, you read the lessons in the book, or at the very least make sure that you read chapter 7 in the book before you do the test. So there's just a lot of details and I can't go over them all. To start with ancient Greece, we'll start, as we always do, with geography. This is a topographical map of Greece. In the military, we call it a topo map. It shows sort of more than just the borders. It shows sort of the geography. You can see there's a lot of islands and a lot of mountains. And this would create, this is in large part why you end up with the independent city-states of Greece, because they are geographically separated from each other, and this is going to play a big factor in why, well, like things like, say, Greece has trouble uniting in the future to fight common enemies in wars, and why they form their own independent political city-states because of the geography. Either they're on an island or they're in what you might describe as a land island in a valley between mountains. This makes them kind of independent of each other. So with that in mind, let's learn about the first civilizations of Greece. So the first farming communities of Greece developed in the few plains in Greece, by the coast and between the mountains. Communities also developed on the islands of the Aegean Sea. There's all those islands we saw on that map. So the island folk lived on the sea, or what you might say off the sea, with their fishing and trading. All the people, be they mainlanders or islanders, grew to be fiercely independent as a result of their isolation. One of the first civilizations in the area were called the Minoans. They lived on the island of Crete, located south of mainland Greece. You can see it here. There's Crete chilling down here. There it gets blown up. The king of the Minoans was named Minos, and his capital city was Knossos. Trade was very important to them. They lived on an island, and they patrolled the Mediterranean for pirates to make sure their trading ships were safe. Around the year 1450 BC, the Minoan civilization collapsed. No one's exactly sure why. They think there might have been an earthquake that created a tidal wave that destroyed the city, but more likely is accepted that they were taken out and conquered by the civilization that developed on the Greek mainland called the Mycenaeans. So the Mycenaeans migrated into Greece around 2000 BC. They integrated with the local people. The isolated villages became small kingdoms. Each Mycenaean king had a small palace on a hill, and they were influenced, well, by trade from the Minoans, initially adopting some of their customs. As it turns out, that might not have been a good idea, because it is believed by the mid-1400s the Mycenaeans conquered the Minoans and controlled the Aegean. So it had basically been controlled, the sea, by the Minoans. Now the Mycenaeans are in charge. They were traders and warriors. It was their military prowess that helped them conquer Troy in the Trojan Wars. It's a pretty epic tale. Check out the link for details. I think everybody's heard of the Trojan horse. This is that early Greek history. Very interesting. There's a link there for some supplement if you'd like to check it out. So the Mycenaean kings began to feud, and the kingdoms became weak after the Trojan Wars. Also, costly wars are to blame. What followed, so basically the Mycenaean kingdoms start to fall and weaken, and then you have a dark age in Greece. Trade went down to near non-existent. Kingdoms fell. The Greek-speaking people named the Dorians basically moved in, like, oh, civilization's weak, we're just going to kind of move in here. And most people were very poor, growing just enough to live on, called subsistence farming. People didn't even bother to record history at this point. Many native Greeks left when those Dorian people started moving in. But on a positive note, the Dorians brought with them iron, which is much stronger than the bronze that basically the Greeks had been using at that point. Now we come to a little subsection I called the Hellenes. Around 750 BC, many of the Greeks that had fled the Dorian invasion started to return, and they brought with them ideas that they had basically got from living abroad. Independent Greek kingdoms started to form and thrive, and these people called themselves the Hellenes, which means Greeks. The Greeks began to trade. They picked up the Phoenician alphabet and made their own Greek alphabet. They were growing more, there was more food, they had a surplus, so they started to trade, and they actually had a population explosion and started forming Greek colonies all over the Mediterranean. And this is where you end up having the rise of the Greek city-states, which are so popular. By the end of the Dark Ages, Greek nobles had pretty much taken over from kings, so less like monarchies, more oligarchies. Each city-state, also known as a polis, began to form. Remember, we said they were all isolated, so instead of having large countries, you ended up with these city-states, which are like very small sub-countries. And they were really like their own countries. The polis was the basic political unit of Greek civilization. Basically, you lived somewhere, you lived in a polis or around the polis. They all had some common characteristics. For example, there's a hill near the center of each polis. It was called the Acropolis. On the Acropolis was typically a fortress and perhaps some temple to honor whatever the local gods were. Near the Acropolis was the Agora, or the public market. This was like the sort of the happening place in town. It was where the market was. It's where people would meet, conduct business, and even conduct politics, like making laws. Many city-states were pretty small, being constrained by the geography of the land. So if you were shoved in a 3-mile square radius between mountains, your your polis couldn't grow more than 3 miles. But then there was like the exceptionally large polis of Athens, the largest city-state, which at one point had a huge population of 300,000 people. 1/3 of them were slaves, though. We'll learn about Athens more next lesson. Greek citizenship. Much of what we think about citizenship in the United States started with the Greek city-states. Citizens are members of a community with rights and responsibilities. They could take part in government, defend themselves in court, vote, and own property. They were expected to fight to defend the city-state if it were attacked, and even serve in public office. Keep in mind, though, that this citizenship, or really just the rights of a citizen, were mainly constrained to an adult male landowning native to the polis. So you had to be a property-owning native-born male to have the full rights of citizenship. So like your kid was a citizen of the polis, your wife was a citizen, but only the man had the rights. But even so, that's still a pretty big change from, say, Mesopotamia to Egypt, where everyone is more or less subject to a king. Originally, the wars of Greece were fought on horseback by nobles, but this style of warfare was replaced by the citizen hoplites. A hoplite is an infantryman armed with a large shield, a sword, and a spear. They fought in tightly packed formations called a phalanx. With a phalanx, normal citizens could form highly effective fighting units. Here's a phalanx, here's an individual hoplite. And this is important, and this is what I'm getting on in this last paragraph, my soapbox speech, if you will. It is expensive to be a cavalryman. You need a horse, and that's expensive. You need armor and weapons, also expensive. Basically, the only people that could afford to fight on horseback and become a cavalryman were the rich people. So all of a sudden, there's these tightly packed wads of normal people in these phalanx units, and they're highly effective. And as a result, you end up having power transferring from an oligarchy to these democracies. So, is it a coincidence that in a society where the normal citizens themselves, despite the fact that they're not rich, could form highly effective fighting units, and these are the same civilizations where the normal people have political power? I don't think it's a coincidence. So take that for what you will. So the phalanx, the hoplite, that's ancient Greece. The very beginnings in a nutshell. In the next lesson we talk about Athens and Sparta. Pretty exciting stuff. Sort of two opposite ends of the spectrum of the Greek city-state, or polis. Go ahead, move on, take the quiz. It's nothing crazy. And we've got a lot more to learn about ancient Greece. Have a good day, and let me know if you have any questions.